I have sat across from people who tortured others for a living. But I want to talk to you about something much more dangerous. Let me take you to a small mud house in the Baluchistan mountains near the Afghan border. I was on a bicycle expedition from India to Switzerland to raise funds and awareness for people affected by leprosy. Me, a bicycle, and thousands of kilometers of desert. I had been brought there to this mud house to meet a militia commander. And as I entered the house, pictures everywhere of Osama bin Laden and diagrams of weapons. Not exactly a place you want to relax in. Suddenly the commander enters. He puts his Kalashnikov against the wall. And he said, "Let's share a meal together." So we sat on the floor, and while we were eating, I noticed a bookshelf in the background. And on that bookshelf, Shakespeare. Lots of Shakespeare. So I asked him, "Do you enjoy reading?" And he said, "Yes, very much." So imagine that scene. A Swiss cyclist, a militia commander, sitting together, sharing a meal, while outside the fighter jets are crossing the border. And suddenly the labels dropped. The fighter, the foreigner, the enemy, the cyclist. We were simply two human beings talking about literature. That night, I understood something. Violence does not begin with bullets. It begins when we stop seeing the human in each other. This is what I've learned during 10 years as a humanitarian negotiator in some of the most volatile places on the planet. What do you think is the most dangerous moment in any conflict? It is not when the violence starts. It is when we stop seeing the human in the other. Conflict begins with a label, with a stereotype about them, the others. Princeton researchers scanned the brains of people who were looking at others considered different or other. And the very area of our brain that is actually responsible for feeling empathy and considering somebody as human went silent. The moment someone becomes them, it is much easier to ignore, to exclude, or even to harm them. And I learned this the hard way. Cycling through the same region, I suddenly heard a bang next to me, a stone hitting the ground, and then another one. And I was looking up to the ridge, refugees standing there, fresh from war, cold. They were watching me as I was passing by. And then suddenly the stones came flying. To them, I was not a person. I was a symbol, a scapegoat, a foreigner, part of a world that had failed them. And in that moment, I understood something. Dehumanization is not something only bad people do. We all do it. And once it starts, it is easy to exclude and to hurt others. We reduce people to categories every single day. At work, in families, in politics, in online, where conversations escalate much faster than they would face to face. In social media, where algorithms don't show us reality. They show us what keeps us engaged. They keep us in our bubbles, and slowly we're starting to live in separate worlds. We used to meet face to face under trees in town halls. Today we meet through screens, already divided. We are more connected than ever, and yet we have never dehumanized each other more. The battlefield has changed. It's no longer only physical, it's psychological, it's digital, every day, everywhere. Behavioral scientist Slovich found something very interesting in his research and very disturbing. Compassion doesn't grow with numbers, it actually shrinks. The more people die, the less we care. 47 people killed here, thousands displaced there. And I knew some of these people. Mothers trying to feed their babies, children asking me about the world. Every number was a person. Everyone loved by someone. So the question is not whether conflict exists or not. It always will. The question is, are we able to stay human inside of it? So let me ask you a question. Do you believe every human being deserves to be seen the same? Not in theory, but in practice, and in the moment when it costs you something. If the answer is yes, let me share with you what I have learned on the front lines of conflicts. The moment we label someone, we stop trying to understand them. Imagine a bar in the Central African Republic, me sitting in front of a commander known locally as the Butcher for killing civilians and torturing prisoners. We met for the first time. I had no expectations and no plan in mind. But instead of accusing him, I just sat there and I listened for hours because I wanted to understand how he saw the world. So slowly, the tension dropped. We were no longer a negotiator and a commander. We were two people sharing a beer. And at some point I told him, strong leaders protect the vulnerable. I had understood that it was all about his ego. And to my great surprise, the next day, he ordered his soldiers to stop the torture. It's not because I won the argument. Maybe he didn't have to prove himself. I never knew the entire picture. So next time you judge someone, ask that person, what is your story? What do you care about? Labels close the conversation. Curiosity opens it. In hard conversations, most people are not listening. They're waiting to respond, to defend, to win. I learned this one night in the mountains of Nepal, standing in front of a farmhouse, about to go to bed with the toothbrush in my mouth. Layla, a young woman, she had been kidnapped by the Maoist rebels. She was accused of being a spy. Her friend had been shot. We had hiked for hours through the rugged terrain to save her life. And suddenly, 3 men came out of the dark. Their leader, Comrade Rocky, as he called himself, he was furious, he was angry, he shouted at me, and he listed all her crimes, listed all the men that had been killed, apparently because of her. I didn't interrupt, I didn't defend, I didn't justify. I just listened and I watched. And I realized he didn't care about mercy. He cared about how history would judge his movement. So I spoke to that. And I said to him, your movement is strong enough to give this woman a fair trial. That is what true leadership looks like. And as they were walking off into the dark, Comrade Rocky turned around and he said to me, did you know that Layla, this young woman, is the karate champion of Nepal? And I said, "No, I don't. But maybe it's a good idea that she trains your man." So we all laughed. In this moment of tension, a moment of humanity, because I left the space for it. Layla got her trial, and she was later released. She lived. So before your next hard conversation with your boss, your partner, your neighbor, ask yourself, give the person the possibility to be heard. And once somebody is heard, the possibilities are great. Disagreement is not the problem. It is normal. It is necessary. I learned this in my early training as a humanitarian from an instructor called Rob. He drew a long line on the whiteboard and he said, this is your ego line. If you attach your ego too close to this line, you're not negotiating. You're waiting for the other side to surrender. This is not how peace works. And I thought about this in war zones, but also in kitchen conversations ever since. You can be firm. You can strongly disagree. You can stand your position, but you should never erase the person in front of you. It's the difference between, I see this differently, and you're wrong. One is challenging an idea or an argument. The other is basically shutting down a person. And once you do that, the conversation is over. I disagree with you, but I want to understand your perspective. Using that sentence will almost change any conversation. These are small acts with big effects, not just in war zones, but in everyday life. Stay curious. Seek to understand and disagree with dignity. And every time you humanize people, others will humanize too. This is how systems and society change, if enough people do it. I met once a boy in a conflict zone. People called him a rebel, a terrorist, a fighter. But he was a 12-year-old child soldier. At his age, I was riding my bicycle. He was carrying a weapon. And he asked me, "Do you think the world is a peaceful place?" And I didn't know what to answer, being in the war zone myself. So over the years, I sat with rebels, with soldiers, with refugees, and I realized one thing: humanity is never gone. Sometimes it's hidden, sometimes it's wounded, but it's always there, just to be rediscovered again, particularly in the times we're living in today. And peace doesn't start with treaties. It starts in how we see each other and how we show up for each other. So, where do you stand in the moments when it's hardest to stay human? That choice belongs to all of us. And that militia commander with the Shakespeare books, I still think about him sometimes. Not as a threat, but as a reader. That's what I mean by dare to stay human. Staying human is your choice. It's not a feeling. It is a decision. Dare to stay human. Thank you.